Just so good evening, everyone. My name is Josie. Again, they trying to come up with this research corner so that we talk more about research and make research part of our culture. And today I'm very much honored to have my academic father. I always say my academic father, if not for all the Namibian geologists, because he was then there since he has been at UNAM for quite a long time and trained most of the geologists. He was also my supervisor for my honors project. So he mentored me from my honors project to my PhD. He was also my supervisor. So we have actually published my first paper together with Prof. Mapani, and now I'm very happy that we are at least supervising a student together. So now we are almost on the same page. I've been very fortunate to serve with him in a lot of committees, and one of the latest being an editor in the Journal of African Earth Sciences. So ladies and gentlemen, without wasting time, let's welcome Prof to give us some hints on academic writing. But I want to also inform you that this is it's a process. You can't get it in one go. Be kind to yourself and just go with the flow and take one day at a time. Learn and learn. You can always learn. So really don't be too harsh on yourself. Prof, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Josie. Thank you very much. Yes, so at this stage in my life, all the time I have either 3 or 5 theses, PhD and masters on my table. And what you don't want is to have a thesis that you really don't want to mark because of the way it's written. This year alone, I've had 2 problematic theses, 1 master's and 1 PhD. So sometimes it doesn't mean that because you wrote your master's thesis and maybe just barely passed, that you can do the same for your PhD. PhD, people will be a bit more strict. One way we can learn how to write is to try and publish as we go ahead. As Isaac Newton said in this particular statement, which I like very much, it says, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." It doesn't hurt you to learn how to write. And the most important thing about writing also is put your ideas down on paper. They may not be in the correct order or in a good format, but just put them on paper. Because when we are writing scientific publications, theses, manuscripts, or even reports of a particular investigation, the aim is to contribute knowledge. And the aim is to ensure that the next person who reads it can understand it. And also, if they want, they can reproduce it by using certain methods which are clearly defined. So as you write scientifically, you need to have a method that you use. And that method must be so clear that someone else can actually reproduce your results. Okay, and then from your results, you come up with your conclusions, or if it is a report, a science report that you have been given to investigate. Let's say if you work for government, Ministry of Water, whatever ministry, and then they say, can you investigate why there's so much uranium in this water from, maybe they say from coals or something like that. Okay, so then the other thing is that we need to learn how to write. You don't just start writing So you need to learn how to write. How do you do that? By reading what has been written elsewhere, by reading what has been written elsewhere. So if you are doing a master's thesis in a particular subject, try and see other master's theses in that particular university. What is their format? What do they require? Look at other master's theses, how they are written, especially the good ones. That gives you an eye ahead of time to say, oh, okay, here they write like this. Okay, and then you read some papers at your level. You really have to start reading journal papers. I'll try and go through that towards the end on how to read a journal paper. Sometimes people say, this paper is very long. It is 56 pages. I don't have that time, but I'm going to try and give you some hints on how to read long papers. Okay. This slide, I just put it to show you that in science, it hasn't really been very smooth for the famous names you know. A good example is Albert Einstein. You know, Albert Einstein, he was very caustic when it came to peer review. He didn't like peer review because he could not write very well. So when reviewers criticized him, he would be annoyed with the journal to say, why did you let them criticize me so much? Okay, at the beginning, he was not known. By 1905, 1904, when he was writing some of his papers, he was not well known when he wrote his first paper. So he would get a lot of criticism, and he would work on that criticism. But when he became famous as a scientist, then he started criticizing some of the reviewers. And that's why, for example, when you look at his theory of relativity, it was improved because of one reviewer who he criticized too much. So 10 years down the line, he said, I should not have said this to that gentleman because what he said then was actually right. Yes, so when you start writing, just remember that if you write maybe a thesis or a few chapters in your thesis, you give them to your supervisor, they come back very red, do not be discouraged. That's how we start how to learn and how to accept. We should be accepted to be molded in a certain way. We need to keep in mind this idea of making precise contributions to the sum of human knowledge. Whatever you are doing, ask yourself, what is unique about what I'm writing in this paper? What is new? What is it that I want to bring out? So that must be something in the forefront of your mind. Say, okay, in this paper, I want to bring out A, B, and C. If you are focused like that, you will not have any problem. Okay, I want to bring to your understanding the fact that the best way to show that you understand your subject is actually to understand your subject. How do you do that? So when you understand your subject, you should be able to explain it in your own words to someone who does not know that particular subject. For example, if I have a grade 8 student that asks me and says, what is calculus? Or what is calculus? What is the use of calculus? I should be able to explain to the grade 8 student without using any equation in plain language to tell him or to tell her what calculus does. For example, I can tell her that, well, you can use calculus to try and help us to see if our rate of change, the way we are doing things, is increasing or decreasing. Or I can tell her that, no, we can use calculus to try and get volumes of bodies that do not have a regular shape. The kid knows what a volume is. Okay, so you need to be able to explain what you are doing in your own words. Then you know that you understand it. So if you are investigating, for example, you're investigating, let's say you are a chemistry student doing your PhD, investigating the closeness of the manganese and the iron peak in photospectrometry, for example. So you need to understand what is exactly making those peaks come together? How can you separate them? If you understand the concept, then you can begin to solve the problem. Okay. So the other thing we need to understand when it comes to writing is to learn to be brief. I'll give you an example. This week or last week? I think it was last week. I was sitting with one of my PhD students, and then I realized that the page numbers for the proposal are only about 10. We had quite a lot of pages, and I was amazed that the student did not even balk at that idea. He went and reduced the proposal from 38 pages to actually 10 pages. And I was amazed that he did it that quickly. So we need to learn how to summarize ideas, how to pick out the most important things and leave out what may not be relevant. Okay. And then the other important thing we need to know is when you are working on a particular problem, you need to know which people have worked on that particular problem or close problems to that one. If you don't, it doesn't hurt to ask your supervisor to say, who has worked on this? Who has worked on this? The supervisor may say, okay, there's a 1992 paper on that. Maybe there's a 2016 paper on that. Try and check. So that is important because your literature review, it gives you a picture of what is known and what is not known. Yeah. So if something is not clear to you, don't be afraid to ask. After all, that's why we are paid to help students. It's always better to write from a knowledgeable perspective than from an ignorant one. And when you read, you should be always asking yourself a question. Okay? Try and formulate a question that when that question is answered, it will clear up your misunderstanding in your head. It's always good to do this process when you are writing or if you are reading. All right. And there's one thing that especially undergraduate students fall into the problem is that they copy something related to a subject, but they do not understand it. They just copy it from the source and put it in their text. You should never do that, especially at postgraduate. If you don't understand something, don't put it in your text assuming that the person who is going to read it will assume that you also understand it. We had an examination for a master's student at UNAM, who when one of the external examiners asked him, he didn't understand what he had written. And that does not give a good impression. You really have to understand that you know your material, and whatever you don't understand, make sure that before you make it your own, you understand what it means. Okay. The other thing we need to understand in the process of grasping our material is to behave like an investigator, like a criminal investigation agent, policeman who's trying to get information from a suspect. Or what a policeman does is that he knows that the suspect does not want to be interrogated. And so he asks questions in a way that he can go around that defense. And so when you're doing your PhD or you're doing your master's, you're actually trying to get information that is so unique and it may not be sitting in front of your eyes. And in the end, it might also be asking you to do something, maybe do an experiment or go and get some more samples, fill the gap. Okay, so once we have understood, now we can summarize the important information. You cannot summarize a scientific paper. If you cannot summarize a scientific paper, it may be an indication that you haven't grasped that paper, you haven't understood that paper. So you should make it a point that every publication you read, you write a small summary. And nowadays it's so easy because you have computers. And computers are so helpful that they can allow you, there are templates for summarizing papers. During our days, our PhD, we used to write on cards. So you've got like 3 cards summarizing one paper. What are the important points in this particular paper? It's this and this and this and this. And those summaries of publications, they help you when you're writing up, especially when you are doing your discussions. Okay. Let me see if I can move this banner somewhere else. Okay. I'm going to go down below this. Okay. So you should support everything with evidence. That's the first point of writing, especially scientific writing. You need to have evidence. I have a master's student now. Was doing a project on water, and we were going through his work, and I would always ask him, said, where did you get this? What is the evidence for this? And he says, no, we were talking and someone from NAMWater said this. I said, no, that's not scientific evidence. You need to prove it that it is like that. So either you go and sample that water and get the data, or find someone who has sampled that water and find that data. So you need to have evidence for everything, okay? And you should expect that your audience will be made up of attentive and careful readers who are going to find the gaps in your work if you didn't do it well. It may not be, but you should always work from this assumption, okay? So with that condition, then you need to make sure that you provide evidence for all your assertions, particularly when those assertions are important to the goals of your work. So normally what we do, if we are writing a thesis, we have objectives, okay? And then in our methodology aspect, we say that to answer this objective, I'm going to do A, B, C, and D. To answer that objective, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And then in our results, we list our results and we write them down. In our discussions, then we say, objective so was answered because this is like this and like this and like this. For objective so and so and so, we found that this is not the case. And the case is A, B, C, D. So you need to make sure that you go back to your original objectives and aims and see that they've been met. Because when you are marked for a thesis, that's exactly what happened. If you're writing a paper, normally in your introduction, you give the background. And in that same introduction, you give the gaps to say, okay, this particular paper, we are addressing this need. This has not been done, it has not been shown. We try and present evidence to the effect that this thing can be done in the way that is acceptable, or something like that. There are times when you want to state your opinion, but if you present your opinion, okay, you need to ensure that you say that this is an opinion, and therefore it does not have scientific evidence, or it has got no bearing on this body of work. Okay, so much of the support that you're going to use for your sessions will come from the work of other scientists. So in other words, you look at what other scientists have done and build on that work for your work. So that you are exactly building on the previous evidence. Okay. When you look at peer-reviewed journals, scientific journals, this is the most important and credible source of information. And that's why you need to actually read this paper. You should make it a habit to read this paper. Okay, so peer review means that the work was submitted to the journal and it has undergone a rigorous analysis by other recognized experts in the field. Okay, So if you are writing a PhD, especially a PhD, ensure that you also publish a journal paper. What does that do? It means that when your PhD goes for examination, people will know that you have already been peer reviewed at that level, which means that they cannot fail you. They might ask you to make a correction here and there, but they will not fail you. Okay, all right. So in a peer-reviewed journal, if you have not shown that your evidence supports your conclusions, the paper will be rejected. Okay, and if the paper is rejected, then either you go and rework the paper. Some journals give you a chance to rework your paper, resubmit it. Other journals don't do that. Okay, so what we need to learn about scientific journals is the fact that depending on the assignment, you may also use your textbook or lecture notes to support your statement. You may use data collected from other sources, and then you incorporate your data. This is why it is important that you understand your data and how it connects with other people. Yeah. So there's also data that comes from, like, for example, the Namibia Statistics Agency, USDA. These government organizations are looked as credible sources of information. So you can actually use that information in your thesis and in your journal. Okay. When you are getting information from the internet, you should be careful. You should cross-reference the source of that information. For example, if you get information from Wikipedia. Now, remember that Wikipedia, anyone can edit that page. Okay, so information from Wikipedia is not looked at as tight scientific information. It's looked as important knowledge, but not tight scientific information because it is loosely edited. Okay. Also remember that these peer-reviewed journals, often they reject submissions that don't measure up to their standards. Okay. As an example, those rejected submissions can still end up online. For example, at Wikipedia and so forth. I have the privilege of having edited 3 journals in my life. I'm now editing one more journal, and the journal rejection rate is that probably 25% of the manuscripts that are submitted are published. It means 1 out of 4. So what does that mean? So it means that in order for your paper to be published, it must rank above a certain level of quality, okay? And then there are other journals that are known as open source journals. So open source journals, you can publish, but they are normally not used as they are not regarded highly as the journals where you don't have to pay anything. Because in an open source journal, you can pay, and then your paper can be published. They might take it through several reviews to make it become nice or look better. But these open source journals are not really looked at as good. So even if you publish in open source journals, most of your publications must be in the other Scopus journals. Okay, for example, universities like UNAM and NAST and other universities, they recognize Scopus journals. Okay, so that's why you should aim at. And also when you're aiming at these journals, you should aim at putting your work in the most prestigious journal. You should say, for example, okay, I've published in Science. So if you are a scientist and you have not published in Science, it means that you are not yet there, because Science is the only journal where all scientists in the world are trying to get in and publish. So if you can get your paper published in Science, then you can say, at least I'm a scientist. For those who are geologists, there's a journal called Geology. Yeah, so there they just want you to write 4 pages. And if you can manage to tell your story in 4 pages, then you get published. And it's very difficult to get in geology. Another one which is very difficult to get is nature. In nature, you're just given 1 page to tell your story. So if you cannot tell your story in 1 page, then you cannot publish in nature. So that's, I normally tell my students to say, try and get in the best journal possible. For example, Josephine, we told her, get into hydrogeology. You get into, try and put your paper in the best journal, among the best. And that's the way you can actually learn. Okay. Okay, so here I'm just giving you, how do we distinguish fact from possibility? Okay, so before something becomes a scientific fact, it needs to be established as by many scientists and agreed upon that that's true. Those of you who are reading Current Thought now, you know that now there is a very big debate in the area of science whether or not the Big Bang Theory is correct, because the James Webb Telescope is bringing out pictures and data that seem to go against our Big Bang Theory. So if you are setting something from your perspective, okay, which has not yet reached consensus, then when you write this, you should use the word possibility, or we suggest that, or we say it has got a high probability that, okay? So depending on your scientific field, scientific writers may be hesitant to use the word fact, because it implies a single, true, and changing assertion. So when you write, you can say that because of this data, we suggest that, then you are free. It's one thing to say that Omahere is delicious, and it's quite another thing to say that according to our data, 1 out of every 3 NAST and UNAM undergraduates like Omahere. So the other one has got data, the other one has no data. So before, when you are writing, remember that the word fact is not one that you can always use, okay? So we need to separate facts from possibilities by using our data in a very, very, very subtle way. So words like suggest, seem, appear, show, exhibits, okay, these are words you can use in your paper. They indicate, or they point to, or they express, or they assert. You should be using verbs like this when you are making judgments from your set of data. So you should not say, because this is the number we got, the facts here are that. No, you don't write like that in science. While data may be accurate, you still have to interpret that data. And it's the interpretation of the data. That's where you now need to learn how to write that interpretation. It has to be in a certain way. So when you're using your own data, you want to be careful to indicate that your data is suggesting something. Your data is trying to say something, okay? So that's an important area. And you can still make assertions based on possibilities, but these assertions may often have the form of, if something is true, then this is the other condition. If something is not true, therefore that also cannot be true. Okay, so we need to be careful how to write our facts. And then one other thing we use in science is what we call anecdotal evidence. So anecdotal evidence is evidence that we have observed from other people, but we have not really proved it. For example, you can say anecdotal evidence suggests that cockroaches respond to electrical appliances or outlets. So, but no one has done a study to really show that. Or one can write to say cockroaches are likely to be difficult to eradicate if moisture is readily available in the household. Okay? So this is, there are no facts that have been shown. You are just writing like that. So you can use the word likely maybe. But if you say that cockroach infestation was found in 45 institutions and 558 cockroaches were collected. And out of these, it was shown that in places where there was no moisture, there were no cockroaches. In places where there was moisture, there was cockroaches. Then you have evidence. Then you have evidence. So that's how you are supposed to organize your facts. Okay, so you should remember that you are when you write, you're not writing for yourself. Yeah, I always tell my students to say, look, when you write something, you're not writing for yourself. You don't write it because it makes it reads nice in your mind. It might read nice, but does it read nice in other people's mind? Okay, so don't make your readers work harder. So don't imply important information before you've given them data, because readers may infer different things. And once they infer something different from what you have implied, then you have lost them. So if it's in a thesis, then they're going to say, this fellow doesn't have information here, this fellow doesn't inform. So you are making your examiner to start thinking of failing you, okay? And you should never leave it out to the reader. Maybe you draw some tables. Yeah, there are some students who put a lot of tables in their thesis. Tables are good, but they are not the best. You should take that table and generate graphs, bar graphs, and pie charts, because those ones are visual, okay? And then use those now to explain to your readers. Say, okay, look, from this table, this chart suggests that this variable is higher than this by so much. So the idea is to make everything to be clear to the person who's reading. And therefore, when we write, we should focus on being clear, focus on being correct. So these are important words, okay? Because even if you have got the best results in the world, if your paper is not written properly, there's been a lot of grammar errors, sentences are not good, it will not matter. It will be rejected, okay? And then there is also what we call flowery language and fluffy language, okay? So flowery language may be accepted in the social sciences, but in the sciences, we try and keep it to a very bare minimum, okay? We don't encourage it. You can use it in your acknowledgements, but not in your body of text, okay? Need to go to my next slide. Here we are. So important things to note are spelling and grammar. So make sure that the spelling and grammar is okay. This must be a standard. Even when you write your work emails, make sure that before you send your email, just check for the spelling. Some of the email softwares don't check spelling. Yeah, and read what you write before you send it, so that you can see that what you have written is correct. What you write and how you write could reflect a positive or negative image. So sloppy and poor written communications can be perceived as something that is associated with laziness. So be careful and orderly with punctuation marks. So your commas, make sure you have to use your commas to separate elements in a series and to separate ideas or clauses. So that's a comma. So we use a comma to separate elements in a series, okay, or to separate ideas or a clause. So the correct punctuation in abbreviations also must be used. For example, the letter EG, okay, which is Latin, which means, for example, IE, which means that is, it is also Latin, etc., etc. So you need to use these punctuations very carefully. In a thesis, I hope you are listening. In a thesis, you can use EG, you can use IE liberally, but please don't use ETC in a thesis. Don't use ETC in a thesis, okay? If you use ETC in a thesis, your examiner will think that you were lazy enough not to find out what these other etc things are. Okay, so do not use multiple punctuation marks like the way we write in SMSs. Yeah, like this, 3 question marks, 3 exclamation marks. Don't use those in your thesis. Okay, and don't use punctuation marks like this in your tables. Okay. Okay, let's look at common errors and tips. Hyphen and dash usage. Most people don't know when to use a hyphen and when to use a dash. Confusion between it's and it's with an apostrophe. We need to learn the difference between those. So the use of the apostrophe is important, especially when you are classifying or you are attributing subject belonging to a particular thing. And then abbreviations and acronyms. So these ones, it's always good that before you use an abbreviation, you first explain it. The same with acronyms. And when we write, we try and use, let's try and use active voice. So if you use passive voice, choose the correct tense. And let that tense be the same tense you're using everywhere. It is not nice to use, maybe you use present tense in the first paragraph, you use past participle in the second paragraph, you use past tense in the third paragraph, then you use subjunctive tense in the fourth paragraph. No, that's not good writing. So you need to use one tense throughout. Don't switch tenses often. Okay. And then whatever you write, you should proofread. Don't expect that because you have written it, it's correct. You'll be surprised that if you write something, you leave it on the table for 2 weeks, you read it again, you'll be surprised to see how many errors you have. Okay. Now let's go to efficiency and precision in writing. So when writing scientific papers, we need to be efficient, direct, and precise. Okay. So we can always learn to alter our writing habits. Okay. So we need to learn how to write by reading how things are written. This gentleman, Jan Pechnik, said that you should write to illuminate, not to impress. Use the simplest words and the simplest phrasing consistent with that goal. So if we look at this statement, so the idea is to bring to light something, but not necessarily to impress others. We may write it in very good language, but the idea is to illuminate. And try and use the simplest words and the simplest phrases. This comes with development. As you continue to write, your words, you might start using complex words later, but start simply and grow just like a baby. Then when we write sentences, don't try and write very long sentences. You are likely to tangle yourself if you write very long sentences. But if you write short sentences that are to the point, you are likely to be on the right track. Okay. Here's an example. This is a very long sentence. It was found that the shell length of live snails tended to be larger for individuals collected closer to the low tide mark. Now, if you look at this sentence, there is nothing wrong with the grammar. The grammar is perfect. Nothing wrong at all. But it's a bit long. We can reduce this sentence to say that snails found closer to the low tide mark typically had larger shells. So it's the same sentence, but we have compressed it in such a way that now it is shorter and much more clearer. Okay, so this is an example of, I happen to be an editor, so I can see what the reviewers are writing about what people have been writing. So this was a reviewer's revision of a manuscript. Okay, so in order to be able to examine and analyze our data, we utilized a number of computer software packages dedicated to conducting statistical evaluation. So you can see this sentence is fine, it has nothing wrong with it. So this was a graduate science paper. So the grammar is fine, but it's quite long. So we can rephrase this to be much shorter and even maybe much more clear. So we can write it like we use statistical software to analyze our data. Finish. So if you compare this with this one, in order to be able to examine and analyze our data, all this information, the first part, is not useful. We utilize the number of computer software packages dedicated to conducting statistical evaluation. We can see that that's much longer. This is very shorter. We use statistical software. Maybe you can put the software in brackets to analyze our data. And this is the way you should be when you write your manuscript. When you are reading it, when you are proofreading it, give yourself an aim. How can I shorten certain sentences? How do I make them shorter? And how do I make them much more clear? So you find that when you learn how to write, for example, I'm now reading a manuscript. So I write the manuscript. I leave it for 2 weeks. I don't touch it because when you write something, your thoughts are in your head. So if you read it the second day, even if you have omitted certain words, your mind will not show you that on your paper you've omitted the word "and," because your mind is reading your ideas. So you're going to read it correctly. But if you leave your work for about a week or two, and then you go back to it, then you're going to see what you missed, and then you write it. You improve it that way. So it's very imperative to read whatever you've written. In most cases, after you've written your work, you tend to know the sentences so well that you never notice the typos and spelling mistakes because you are reading your mind, remember? Okay, so what you need is a 2 weeks break from that work, then come back again and reread it. Then you find all the errors. You're going to identify the small errors and say, oh, how did I miss this? How did I miss that? And that is very important, whether you are writing a thesis or you're writing a paper. Okay, I don't know whether I should pause here for some questions or now we go to the publications side.
Yeah, I think how many slides do you still have, Prof?
Let me check. Where am I? Okay, I still have 15 more.
Okay, I rather then we go for the slides, then we just have question at the end, because if we start with questions,
won't finish.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go now to academic skills writing. So now when we come to academic skills writing, you need to think of what you're actually doing. So we as a researcher, you first collect your data. And then remember, for example, if you're doing a water project, you should be careful to remember that if you collect your data today, then you go again and collect your data, let's say 6 months. So there's a time interval that has passed between your first data collection and your second data collection. You need to ask yourself, is that time interval, does it have an effect on my comparison of these samples? Or am I interested to see the evolution of these samples over this time? So that must be your research strategy. So if you are maybe doing agriculture, so you want to see how a certain crop performs when there's a lot of rainfall and when it is being irrigated. So you grow it during the rain season, and then you collect your data, and then after the rains are gone, you do an irrigation and you check the two things. So you need to have what we call a research strategy for your work. Okay, that is going to have an impact on your results. So have that in mind. Don't let the examiner tell you that, why didn't you do this? Okay, so you need to ensure that you've got a research approach, especially if you are doing a PhD. You should have your methodology cut out, and your methodology should question it. What are the gaps that this methodology is leaving behind? Yeah. Okay. And then research philosophy. And then finally, how do these two come together? Okay. So reading is part of writing. You can never run away from reading if you are going to be writing. So you need to visit either your e-library or your actual real library as often as you are writing. Okay. Now, the important thing I want to bring out here is plagiarization. So yesterday we were talking about a student who plagiarized. Her thesis, one of the examiners was at Stellenbosch. And the supervisor read the thesis and told her that, look, that part, I think it's written so well. I don't think it's your work. You know, because as lecturers, we know how the student writes. Each one of you, the way you write is a signature. I can know that this has been written by Josie. And the way you write, you may be 55 in the class, but once you write an essay and I read it, the first time, the second time, the third time, I know who has written one. And when students copy, you exactly know who copied from. Just to make them feel happy in class, you may tell them, so and so, come and see me. I think one of you copied from the other, but you know who copied because the language that is used is very unique to each person. And so when you copy something from either a textbook or from a paper, don't copy it word for word. Write it down and then summarize it in your own words. Okay? It's very safe that way. That student I'm talking about failed because there was a paragraph. Can you imagine you write a body of work which is 156 pages long. And then out of those 156 pages long, there's just one paragraph which was copied word for word. And because it was copied word for word, it was called plagiarization by the external examiner, and the person fails. It is not worth it. It's not worth it. So if you copy something from a textbook or from a paper, you write that in your own words. In actual fact, it's better that when you are writing, you don't have the source in front of you, you have your own notes in front of you. That way you will not be tempted to plagiarize. You will not be tempted to plagiarize. Okay, so critical reading is very beneficial because it helps you to write better. So how does it help you? Because it makes you to determine what is and what is not robust piece of research and writing in your field. So if you read like 3-4 papers on the same subject, you can tell which paper is written well and which one is not written well. And this, especially if you're doing PhD, this is what you should be doing when you read your papers. You should be able to evaluate the paper and say, okay, this paper was written well, I understand, and it was very clear. But this one was mumbo jumbo. So if you start doing that, unknowingly to you, you will be improving your analytical skills for writing. And that's why it's very important to read. So critical reading helps you to identify where existing research has left a gap that you could fill. It also brings you to the attention of how others write. Okay, you become more self-aware of your own written work. Okay, so critical reading is really, really, really important, especially at PhD level. You cannot substitute it for anything else. Yes. Okay, let's go on. So you should plan your writing. So I got this from Sharples. This is a very good book. It's a general book on writing. If you have an opportunity to buy this book and you're doing a PhD or master's, please just get it. Okay, so even professors read books on writing. So there's what is known as free writing, notes and sketches, an idea list, okay, those yellow post-it notes we put on the thing, mind maps, there's what is known as skeleton paper with subheadings, outlines, and also draft text. So all these different types of writing come very handy when you are writing your thesis or you're writing a paper. Yeah. So let's just quickly go through. I think I missed one. Okay. So mind map is this is really something that you do. Not doing it like you are really trying to do something very complicated. No. It doesn't have to be as elaborate as this. So a mind map is just a guideline to say, okay, how am I going to do this? If you're writing a paper, for example, you say, what are my keywords? Okay, these are my keywords. All right. So how am I going to organize my paper? What am I going to start with? What will I end with? What images am I going to put in the paper? How do I connect these ideas? That is called a mind map for a paper. Some people who are not graphic, they don't find this useful. They find what we call signposting to be more useful to them. So when you are writing, maybe some of you have seen that maybe your supervisor has said that, okay, from this topic to this topic, the ideas are not flowing. Your thesis is not connected. The reason why that happens is because you have not sustained an argument. You need to sustain an argument in your thesis. It should flow from the beginning, from your objectives. It goes for in your literature review. You don't just write your literature review. You should always comment in your literature review. Okay, so and so found this and this and this, and so found out this and this. However, no one has done this and this. This appears to be a gap. So you are carrying that into your methodology. Okay, so this has not been done yet. So in order to do it, I'll use this methodology. For objective number 1, it will help me find this. Objective number 2 will help me find that. Objective number 3 will help me connect these ideas. And finally, I'm going to come up with this gap, the knowledge that is missing in this particular subject. Then when you go to your results, again, you say, okay, I've got these results, and I've got these results, I've got these results. These results help to fill this gap. These ones support this. So you need to sustain an argument. You need to prove that there's something running in your thesis. When somebody has read your thesis, they say, yeah. She worked on those marama beans. Yeah, she found that the genetic code in those things is completely different from all the other beans. So that's because someone sustained that particular argument throughout the thesis. Okay, and then you need to signpost your argument. Okay, so you always have to be referring back to the previous chapters. Okay, so that your audience can see that, okay, this figure is very important. In figure so, I showed that this is this. This result adds this particular dimension, which means that this thing has to be like this, like that. So you continually sustain your argument. You should use words to transition between unknown and known, or from lower to better, or from lower to worse. You can use words like however, nevertheless, therefore, despite this finding, this is still the case. So you need to illustrate your theoretical positions with concrete examples. So in your thesis or your paper, you need to give these particular examples. Say, in our experiment, this is what we found. And then you generalize your findings now to apply to a larger context. When I normally write publications, I tell my students to say, look, the title is very important. You want to make your title not to be local. You want to make your title to show that it can be used everywhere. It has to be global. So say, for example, I'm doing this, for example, you can say fingerprinting uranium sources in the Khan River. So you are actually fingerprinting something that has not been done before. And you try and put a title that attracts people to say that this is the first time it has been done and it can be done. Okay. And then in all your writing, you should remember that the reader is always anticipating the next paragraph. What is this person going to say? What is this? So your paragraphs must be stepwise. They should be in such a way that one follows the other, Okay, so signposting and making transitions, you link the paragraphs, pick from where you left, and then conjunctions, you should express different kinds of meaning and relations. Then words like when, while, after, before, and when you're talking of temporal relations, and then causative relations, you use the word because, if, although, so that, therefore. And then when you have adversative relations, then you use however, alternatively, although, nevertheless, while. Additive, you use words like similarly, incidentally, and so forth. So signposting through pronouns is very, very important. Words like this, these, those, that, they, it, them, they should be put in the right places. Don't forget about adverbs. Things like firstly, secondly, especially when your discussion and your conclusions, they should come in order of importance. Okay, and then of course, examples, illustrations. You should try, if you have got the opportunity, you should try and use as many figures as you can to support your argument. So because figures are like signals. Okay, so this is just a guide to show you the kind of words you can use. So if you are willing, Josie, I can give you this presentation. It's not proprietary. Okay, so
Sure.
Yeah, so you can claim, you can comment, you can affirm, you can confirm. So you can move from the first column, second column. So the third column means that you are sure about that particular thing. For example, this one, I got it from a gentleman called Coffin. So he's got a nice book on writing. Oh, where did I go? Okay, I think I'm about to end. Yeah. Okay, so complex sentences. So this is important. When you're writing a complex sentence, make sure that it has an independent clause and it has dependent clauses. Okay, so the idea can be that you can make the independent clause one sentence and the dependent clause another sentence. For example, if you say, as it was morning, I began to crave coffee and waffles. You should ensure that your sentences are not complex. So in this particular sentence, for example, you can ask yourself, oh, so this person was craves coffee and waffles in the morning. You can rewrite this sentence to read better, okay? So that it's no longer complex, but you simplify it. Okay. Listing. So when you make a list, you should use a colon. Okay. Only when you are joining the list to a complete sentence, then you can use a semicolon. For example, the alloy consists of copper, aluminum, and iron. Or you can say the alloy consists of 3 metals: copper, aluminum, and iron. So this one is better than this sentence, because this one gives you additional information before you read those. By the time the reader reads the alloy consists of 3 metals, what comes in their mind is, what are those 3 metals? But if you just write the alloy consists of copper, aluminum, and iron, it's more like a boring sentence. Okay, so when you write and list, try and put these things together. So to finish up, so when you are asked what type of writer are you able to tell? Okay, what approaches to reading do you have to improve your writing? What do you read? What is it that you read that can help and improve your writing? Okay, how do you generate ideas in order for you to write something? Okay, so the important thing about writing is to always come up with a structure. Before you write, you come up with a structure. Okay, when you're doing your PhD now, most likely you already have your chapter 1, the introduction, your chapter 2, the literature review, and maybe your chapter 3, which is the methodology. Maybe you have that structure already. Now you're going towards results, discussion, and conclusion. So it's always good to have a structure because that guides you. and it relates your ideas, joins your ideas together. Your literature review will always be evolving until the last day you submit your thesis. So here's a picture that summarizes writing a paper. So when you write a paper, you have these guys who are called reviewers, who are going to look at your paper to ensure that it is in good shape. If it's not in good shape, each one of them is going to comment on it. At the end there's a guy called the editor. He is the goalkeeper there. If there's something that these guys missed, he might pick it up and send the paper back to you to be improved. Okay? So the peer review process is like a cross-checking to say, have you done it properly? Okay. I want to show you this particular paper. This paper, we wrote it for growth information. We're using these rings to estimate climate change. And the first author, Arash Kangala, I drafted the structure of the paper and told her, start putting stuff in and let's start writing this paper. And then because it was on growth rings, I told her to choose a journal, and she went for the top journal in dendrochronology in tree rings. This is the top journal in tree rings. So if you want to write something on tree rings in the best journal, this is the one. And I asked her, I said, why did you choose this journal? And then she said, I was just looking at the journals and I wanted to see which one deals more with what we are doing and nothing else. I said, okay, but this is the most difficult journal to get in. Do you think your paper will be accepted? She said, let's just try. And this is the way you begin to write. You should do your best to try and get in the best journals. Okay, now when you're writing your journal, or you want to read a journal, you should read the abstract first and the conclusion. So if the abstract was written properly, it should give you the information that is critical. So what is in the abstract? In the abstract, there is the why. Why was the paper written? There is the information on the results. What are the results? So in the abstract, they say, we did this to find out this. In this particular place, what we found was this and that. So unlike the introduction, the abstract gives you the data, the important data summarized. The conclusions, it interprets that particular data. So in the conclusion, you say this data means this because the other guys who did this found this. Okay? And then you can read the introduction for the context. If the paper is very long, you can read the first paragraph of the first line of every paragraph in the introduction to get the context of the paper. If someone is a good writer, the first line of every paragraph should bring out something important in that particular paper. Okay? And then if you have time to read everything, you can read the first line of every paragraph in the paper. So even if the paper is 50 pages, you can be able to read, or at least gone through it and know what the paper is all about. So if you do that, and that does not give you what you're searching for, then you can go back and look at the results part and read all the results and discussion. If you do this, you should surely come up with a very good picture of that particular publication. So that's how you would read publication. And therefore, when you write, you should also aim for this. You should say, my abstract must have the data, the information. I just rejected one paper where the guy in the abstract says, oh, we're going to do this. We hope this is going to help us find this. And then we'll try and do this. And finally, we'll put the results together to show what this thing is all about. I rejected it. I said, the abstract is not an abstract. It has no data. Okay. And then the introduction was not giving the perspective. So the introduction should give context. The introduction should show me three important things. One, who else has done that work? Two, why are you doing that work? And thirdly, what methods or ways have you used to try and address that problem? Okay. So when you write, you should also write like that. And then your results, you should not fall into the temptation of interpreting your results when you're giving them. Try and learn to give your results and then interpret them later in your discussion. Okay. So when reading a manuscript, okay, you should also make notes, use a highlighter and try and make files that you keep a file of the papers that you have read. And like nowadays, you can keep folders on your computer. Each paper you've read, you put it in a folder where you said read papers. Papers you have not read, you put them in a different folder. And then you can write a brief critical response about the paper to say, okay, this paper, I found out this paper is not good on this, but it's good on that and that. And you should keep note of the references. Yes. Finally, I want you to know that you should keep a record of all the publications you've read, everything. So it's not magic that when a student has written a thing, I can go and say, okay, I read that in that paper. It's because I keep track of these things. So you should keep track of all the papers you've read, okay? And if possible, summaries. This is very useful for PhD and MSc studies because this is a long project, maybe over 2 or 3 years. So you are likely to forget certain information and writers. So when it comes to check something out, you straight away go to your summary and then you can find it. If you don't find it, then maybe you can look for another paper. Okay, so that's the end.
All right, thank you, Professor. I think now we move into the discussion and questions. This was really nice. It's good I'm reviving also some skills because we learn every day. So I can just highlight a few things to say. First, you need to be very brief when you are writing. Don't make assumptions that people understand and then you put something that you don't understand yourself, so you understand your work. And supporting evidence is very key. What is also speaking very much to me is about spelling and grammar. And this is even in reports, emails, whatever. So the moment you pick up these grammars, you get really not interested in the work anymore. It's very, even if you really have a good result, it's a turn off, such to say, to read. The person will start doing something else. And sometimes don't be surprised if your supervisor doesn't return your work on time. It's because they struggle to read it if it's not written properly. Because you take more time to read things that are not written properly. And nowadays, maybe also to add is to say there are softwares like Grammarly that you can download for free that can help you with checking grammar and so. And with regards to Prof, we mentioned the last one to say keeping folders and what. There is also reference management systems nowadays like Mendeley and so, where you can keep your all the papers you read. You can even arrange them from project to project, that this is what. I think this is going to be the next session for next month, if the colleague who I promised to give it is available. So let's hope that is the case. But there are really a lot of things that didn't even exist back then that nowadays can make your life very much easier when it comes to writing. So let's use those opportunities. We take now some questions. I'm sure of course, we took a little bit longer than planned because we are teachers, guys. So we are used to teaching, but so we can take questions. Yes, the first question is from Alina. Yes.
Hi, Doctor. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you again to Prof. I'm also his former student, so I was really, really excited and captivated, learned quite a lot. I think there are a few things that stood out for me that I wanted to ask just clarity on. I think one of those things being, he mentioned the differences in journals, some journals being top quality and others not. Is there perhaps a listing where someone who haven't published before will know which one is a top ranked journal or something like that, so that I know which paper should I want to get into? I know it differs from discipline to discipline, like science, geology, they all have theirs, but and also knowing which papers perhaps were rejected and they are out there just circulating. And I've seen that a lot of papers one have to actually buy, and yeah, it gets a bit tricky just there by the papers. So maybe universities have, I heard about they have libraries where they can share with other institutions and things like that. I'm not really familiar, I've never used that, but I would love more direction on that. And I think the other one was on plagiarism. I understand the dangers of plagiarism. In fact, it's not allowed in any institution that so it's just that there are certain things, for example, even if you paraphrase or rearrange, it might come out the same. Because I remember there was even, I think there's an app right now that lecturers are using just to pick up something. If you have something and they say you have 50, if you have more than 50% match, it is like you have plagiarized and you fail. But in some instances, you can say water is clean. And then that sentence is very difficult to like just turn around in your own words. How that handled, like water is just clean.
Yeah.
Water is life.
Okay. Okay. Right. So let me try and answer your questions. The first one was on journals. So you can check in any particular field, you can check the impact factor of the journal. The impact factor of the journal tells you how good that particular journal is. It's a general guide, because there are some journals, for example, which are, for example, maybe it's, let's say, Journal of Asian Sciences. So it's only open to the Asians or people who have worked in Asia. You can only publish something that's coming from Asia. Yeah, but the impact factor is a good indicator. The second good indicator is that it must not be an open source journal. You can publish in an open source journal. There's nothing wrong with publishing an open source journal, but the problem with an open source journal is that you have to pay publication fees. And also, if you are an academic, some universities don't count it as a publication because it does not come in Scopus. So in an open source journal, what happens that if your work is not very good, because you have paid, they will try and get reviewers who can improve, bring it to a certain particular standard. But you might never reach that top standard that you want. Those are open source journals. Okay, but nowadays, open source journals are beginning to be recognized as alternate places to publish in. Okay, but I would prefer that you go for Scopus journals. Okay. Then you asked the question on the plagiarism. Okay, so plagiarism, what is currently accepted, that your work should be below 18% similarity index, meaning that I can just give you an example. 3 months ago, someone submitted a paper to the Journal of African Earth Sciences. That person had published that paper in another journal. He just changed the title a bit and changed a few headings. And then the first thing I do is I throw it into the similarity index test. Then it came to about 78, 80%. It's similarity index. So the first thing I did is to tell the author to say, okay, so this work has been published before in this journal. It came as this and this, and therefore, based on that, I'm not even sending it to reviewers. I'm sending it back to you, and we are rejecting it. And of course, he didn't want, and he cried, and no, this is unfair. I said, yes, until you can bring it, the similarity index to 18%. So anything above 20% is considered plagiarism. One thing that there are several ways you can avoid plagiarism. If you have copied something almost word for word from someone, put it in inverted commas. Let it be in parentheses and let it be cited to show that particular sentence is not your own crafting. You got it from somewhere else. Okay, so you can say so and so 1952 said, in inverted commas, you put their words if those words really you want them to be in your thesis, so that when the index is coming up, it can show that, okay, this is cited. You are not claiming credit for those words.
Okay.
So I can take the other question, Prof.
Yes.
The one about articles, buying articles. So university, like at the University of Namibia, we do subscribe. Most of the university have subscribed to publishers who are publishing these journals, articles. So when as a university have subscribed, it means that you can get the article through your institution. So the institution pays so that their students or the whole community have access. So what happens, like with UNAM, if you are using a UNAM intranet or whatever, you are likely to download the article straight. If not, you can use your login detail, your student number, and your password that you usually will use on other platform that you can do from anywhere. Like you go through the UNAM library site and you can get access to the articles. So most of the institutions have subscribed and students are able to get these articles through their libraries. You just have to ask your institution, how do you get access to most of these journals?
Okay, yes, thank you very much.
Yes, Alina, you can also ask someone who is at the university to download it for you, especially if you are studying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And then the other thing I did not mention is that when you write your thesis, it's always very nice to try and publish from it. Don't just leave it as a thesis. Try and publish from it. Reduce the 100 pages to 12 or 15 pages.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, we have a second hand from Wanga.
Oh,
Thank
okay.
you.
I just wanted to say you can, like what I said in the last presentation, that Science Hub is also open. You can mostly get all this locked up. You just copy the DIOA, I think is something identifier number, and you paste it on Science Hub. You get it open, I think almost 90% of the articles that we try to open that says they are locked. Or the other thing I just wanted clarity on Prof on the scopus and the impact factor. This I tried to get many people, but they couldn't explain to me. What is the importance of this higher impact factor on your publication in relation to promotion or publications? Thank you.
Okay, so like if you go and Google my name on Google Scholar, it will show you the citations, right? You are going to see the number of citations. Okay. So the impact factor is the one that tells you how much people cite that particular journal or articles written in that particular journal. So most journals would do once in a while produce what is known as a special issue. A special issue is when all the papers are about just one subject, because then you get high impact factors. People go to that particular subject. Okay, then so the impact factor, for example, I can say that the paper I published in geology, that was 2003, and in science in 2006, and now the one I published in flora, but I'm not a biologist. Okay, so those articles are cited the most. And when that particular article is cited the most, it means that people are interested in that particular subject, and that is what increases the impact factor. And the good thing about the impact factor of your article is that your journal sometimes will ask you to say, a journal will ask you to say, please, can you write something on this subject? Okay, and then because they see that people are citing that particular article. For example, we wrote a paper in Journal of Exploration, Geochemical Journal of Exploration, on the speciation of vanadium, lead, zinc, copper, and so forth from the Caucasus. So that article is being cited around the world, although it was written six years ago. It's being cited as current literature. So it's because the methodology that was used there was the first time it was done like that. And then I see here also from the chat, Marcus is asking, how do you differentiate an open source journal from a Scopus journal? It's very easy. In the open source journals, you are required to pay to publish. So they'll ask you to say, you need to pay 750 euros in order for you to publish your paper. Okay, so after you've paid, then your article will be accepted. In the Scopus journals, you don't have to pay anything for your paper to be published. It just has to be good science. If it's good science, then it is published. For example, the American Journal of Science. Okay, so you are not required to pay. But if you write good science, it's published. If you don't write good science, do not be published. Okay.
Thank you. Oh, I think I had closed my chat box. I'm only getting to see now comments and everybody. Okay, so people are able to see. But also with impact factors, you also need to just Google top journals in hydrology, top journals in agriculture, just in your field. That is one of the best things. And then they will list with the one with the highest impact factor and the one with the lowest. I always tell people that are starting off like myself as an early career scientist or researcher, try to not aim at the highest, because even the top scientists are already struggling to go in those top ones. So if you take an impact factor of like 10, 11, and it's your first article, it might demotivate you from wanting to write again, because the comments that are going to come are going to be very harsh. I tell you that much. So you need to prepare yourself. So you start with impact factor even of 2, 5, and stuff like that, depending on the field. So start small. But also another thing, how to choose the right journal is put the title of your paper, whatever you are writing. I throw it in Google Scholar right now, and then you see people who have similar topics. Where did they publish? Where did they publish those kind of titles? Then it gives you a guidance to say, okay, this means my research will really fit in this journal, then you are able to go to that specific journal, read the papers in that and see how are they writing, what is the writing style for journal of whatever, so that you can really fit in that journal.
Yes, yes, that's very good, Josie. But don't be content in writing in the lower end journals.
Yeah.
Josie, you have a paper in hydrogeology, so
yes, that was like, but it's just like sometimes I find people struggling because they just want to go for the top and what. You can start low. And one of the
Yes.
things I actually learned this from Prof. Savenya. I don't know, I always fail to say his name properly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Savenia, yes.
He said even one of his most top cited paper is in the journal. He thought it's in the journal with low impact in physics and chemistry of the earth, and is one of his most cited paper. I, for one, my most cited paper is my least favorite paper, but it is still the most cited among all the things I've written. So it doesn't take that away, that fact. There's a question, I use Grade Coach for guidance. It's precise and straightforward. Is Grade Coach legit, or am I on the other side of the fence? I have never heard about it. Probably it is. Could you perhaps explain what is it about?
Pascalia.
Yeah.
Pascalia is here.
Yeah. Pascalia, could you perhaps explain how this Grade Coach works? Maybe it can be helpful to somebody else. I've never used it. I've never heard of it. Okay, Marcus, then you can come.
Yes, evening, Doc, and thank you, Prof, for the presentation. My question was actually on peer-reviewed and open source. It was more on when you come to referencing aspect. How are the open source articles the one that you normally find difficult to get access to ask for you to open an account or sort of before you can access the paper? Because I always struggle because we're always encouraged to only cite peer-reviewed papers. But now there's those one that also hanging along the way that you read about and you don't know if it's peer-reviewed or not. When come to citation and referencing articles, how do you determine that this is a peer-reviewed paper and the other one is not?
The open source are also peer-reviewed. The open source are also peer-reviewed. The only difference is that the peer review in open source is not very rigorous. I don't know how many of you were following the COVID debate. You remember that there was a paper that was published in a very top journal in medicine called The Lancet. Okay, so that is supposed to be a top journal, but there was a mistake in that particular paper. There was a big error. And the gentleman who identified to say, no, who wrote a counter paper to say, no, what you guys have written there is not correct on COVID. It was on how the COVID virus is, it can be overcome between natural immunity and vaccine stuff. The Lancet did not publish that gentleman, the one who was arguing against that paper. So what he did is he went to an open source journal where you pay to get published. And then it got published there in the open source journal. And when the other scientists started now doing experiment to see if what he was saying was right, looking at zinc and vitamin D, they found that it was true. So they wrote to the editors of the Lancet that they need to withdraw that paper which was accepted, and it was withdrawn. So it does not mean that everything in the open source is not good. That's the reason. That's the main reason I am bringing this up. But what also happens in papers, in journals, if you write something which is not correct, it can be retracted. Your paper can be removed. Like that Lancet paper, which it was accepted at first and even came even on the big news like CNN and so forth. But later it was retracted and removed. So I'm giving you that example just to tell you that not everything in the open source is not good science. There's some very good science in open source publications. But what I'm saying is that you can also publish in open source, but don't put all your publications in open source because it might work against your promotion, for example. You need to have a lot more of your journals in Scopus, a lot more of your papers in Scopus. Let's say if you have published 80 or 70, maybe you have 10 or 15 in open source, and then you have 65 in Scopus. So that should be your model. That's the first. That's the first part. The second part is that you can still reference publications in open source, especially if the science has been proved to be true. Because the open source publications, immediately open source publication is published and it's online, it becomes open to everyone to investigate it and to see whether or not what has been published is correct. And those papers, okay, for example, I don't know, those of you who are in geology, you remember the issue of extrusive and intrusive carbonatite issues where a paper had to be retracted because the evidence that was given for the extrusive was not correct after people had looked at Udonyo in Tanzania being a complete alkaline carbonatite and extrusive and not dangerous and so forth and so forth. So what I'm giving you are just guidelines for you to understand. Yeah, you will not get promotion at NAST or UNAM if all your papers are in open source because they don't consider it.
And it's also very difficult because a lot of time we don't have, this is why people say, I don't have research money to publish and what. But
Exactly.
in most of the Scopus pre-reviewed, you don't necessarily have to pay. You can pay for open access, but it's not a must. But for open source, it's a must for you to pay. And then you find people saying, I don't have money to publish. But you can publish without paying. So that is one of also the key thing, especially in science, is it's even very expensive to pay for these open sources. It's usually, I was looking in geology, I think most of the thing, I have not found anything that is less than $1,000 US.
Yeah, they start at 750 euros going up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's there's one question here. I think we can now try to wrap up. There's one question from Nicolene saying, how do I go about integrating my published paper into my thesis, taking cognizance of other authors of the paper? So since you have co-authors in your publication, how do I put it in my thesis, Prof?
Okay. So if that paper are you the first author?
Yes, Prof.
Okay, so if you are the first author, there's no problem. And if it's the same topic, you are the same subject, there's no problem. You can actually incorporate it. Okay, like the university I went to where I did my PhD, you could not publish, you could not graduate without writing a thesis. but you could not graduate without having to publish a minimum of 4 papers. So what I did is I published 4 papers and I published the 5th one after graduation. And each paper was a chapter in the thesis. So I just expand the paper in the thesis. Because the paper will only be about 15, 20 pages. And then I have to expand it and put a lot more data. So each paper I expanded it to be a chapter. So I had 5 chapters, okay? So based on papers, on results. And then I had, of course, the discussion chapter and the conclusion. So if it's your paper, you have the freedom to incorporate your results in the thesis. You just expand the material, because in the thesis, you have the latitude to write in detail and explain things in detail. Yeah. So don't be afraid. And all you have to do is make sure that you put that paper as an appendix at the end of your thesis.
Thank you so much.
Right. Okay. Pascalia says that the, what is it? Grad coach is a one-on-one coaches, blog, TV, YT that covers all topics of research projects.
Oh, great.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. No, I've never actually come across it. It's good that somebody could perhaps benefit someone. Is it for free or I don't know? But anyhow, there are a lot of sites. Yeah, she says it's for free. So there are a lot of sites and whatever. And nowadays, that is the beauty of nowadays. I think there's really a lot of information. One just have to be, of course, careful on the kind of information you are taking, but there's a lot of help out there. You don't have to feel alone. There's a lot of things on YouTube and on Google and whatever. There is a lot of people that are also willing to help. There's a lot of people really trying to make it a better world for people in academia, students especially.
Yeah.
Yes.
You guys are much, much better. And these days, you guys have got maybe better supervisors. When I was doing my PhD, my supervisor would just say, when is our next paper? And that's all. When is our next paper? So I was just busy writing papers.
Yeah. All right, Prof, if you have some last few words before we conclude.
I think for me, for you guys who are doing PhD and masters, the first thing I would want you to understand is that you cannot run away from reading. And if you want to publish as you are writing your thesis, as you are studying your thesis, that is the best way to go. You need to sell your manuscript to the editor. So you need to write a cover letter to say, dear editor, we are submitting this paper because we have found new data which is not available anywhere, and it will help other scientists. So you need to sell your paper. Remember, for example, I'll just tell you of myself. I receive maybe about 17, 18 manuscripts every week. And from those manuscripts, I need to choose which ones I send to the reviewers. Okay? And you need to sell your information. You need to say what is new. Why does your work need to be published? Why does the world need to know about your page, about your research? So that must be both in the introduction of your manuscript and in your cover letter. The other thing is, if your paper has got a lot of graphs and figures and papers, it's more likely to be appealing. People are likely to even want to review it. But if it's just text upon text upon text upon text, that is something that most people would say, okay, but let's see. Okay, so you need to be careful about that. Then the last thing I would like to tell you is that make sure that you try and have a working relationship with your supervisor. You don't have to be friends with your supervisor, but have some parameters. For example, you can agree to say, okay, can I see you every 2 weeks if I've got some problems, or can I see you every week? So some supervisors are okay, you can see them anytime you want, but others are not that open. But make sure you have a concrete working relationship with your supervisor. And should you find data which is not which seem not to go with your hypothesis, don't try to fight your data. Try and find an interpretation that can speak to why your data is that way. That is also accepted in the scientific way. And please reference material that you borrow from somewhere else. Always reference. As you saw in this presentation that I was giving, something which is not mine, I always put it. This came from this one. This came from this one. Yeah. No, thank you very much. And I wish you the best, all of you. And I know that you're going to do it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof, for coming and making time to spend with us, even if you are in the field. A life of a nomad. I always think
Yes.
geologists are nomadic people because we are always on the go. Thank you guys for joining. I'm sure I hope that it was as good and very useful to you as it is for me. And we're hoping to have more of these kind of sessions on Research Corner with Josie. Have a blessed evening, everyone. Sorry that
Thank
we
you,
took a little
everyone.
bit longer than planned, but the
Bye.
information is really...
Bye, Miss Josie.
Hi, how are you?